Well, welcome to the Department of Justice and George Washington University Law School's conference looking at post 9/11 discrimination and hate crimes. You know, what happened, where are we, and where are we going? It's just a few. I'm Eric Treen, Special Counsel for Religious Discrimination at the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Just a few logistical items. Restrooms are both downstairs and upstairs. There's no drinks or food allowed in the room, but there are refreshments upstairs, and then there'll be a reception after the conference with food. And please turn off your cell phones or put them on vibrate. There's not good reception here, but it might come through. And that's it. And you can come up and ask some questions during the day if there are any issues, and there are folks along the perimeter to help you as well. It's my pleasure to introduce our host here at the auditorium today, Paul Schiff Burman, who's Dean of the George Washington University Law School and the Robert Kramer Research Professor of Law. His scholarship focuses on the ways in which globalization affects the interaction of legal systems, and his new book, Global Legal Pluralism, A Jurisprudence of Law Beyond Borders, will soon be published by Cambridge University Press. He's a former dean of the Arizona State University Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law, and he was the Jesse Root Professor of Law at the University of Connecticut. He's a graduate of Princeton and got his law degree at NYU, and he's a former law clerk to Chief Judge Harry Edwards of the D.C. Court of Appeals, D.C. Circuit, excuse me, and then clerked for Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court. Dean Burman.
Thank you. So thank you all for coming. I'm thrilled to be able to introduce and host this event. It seems to me that for a law school, this kind of event is precisely what we should be doing, particularly a school like GW, where our focus is external. We care about legal education that changes the world, that engages with the core public policy questions facing the world, that is all about engagement and law in action. And this kind of a conference that connects thought leaders, politicians, government officials, and the general public is precisely what I think a law school like that should be doing. And certainly if we think about big public policy questions that face the world, one of the biggest is to think about the 10 years since the September 11th attacks, and to think about the effect or the changes that have been wrought by those attacks on the way in which we do almost everything in this country, and those are positive and negative, I suspect, and hopefully there will be lots of discussion about that. I'm reminded about a month or two after the attacks. I was up at the University of Connecticut where I was a professor at the time, and I remember talking to one of my colleagues who was a constitutional law professor, and she said, as we were reading all kinds of things about detentions particularly of Arab Americans and so forth, she said, you know, I've always taught the Korematsu case, which was the Japanese internment case from World War II, for those who don't know. I've always taught that case as if it was, you know, some benighted relic of some earlier era that we would never do again. And yet you see how quickly the temptation is to move right back to that space. Now, you know, I think to our credit, to the judiciary's credit, we didn't go all the way back there. And so I think some lessons were learned, but I also think some lessons are still to be learned. And it is very hard for a country to figure out what its bearing should be after such a cataclysmic and traumatic event. And so now, 10 years later, I think it's important to take stock. And again, I think that a law school, and certainly this law school, wants to be at the forefront of thinking about what the balances are, what the core values of the country are, and how we should move forward. That's about all I'm going to say, because you don't really want to hear me talk. You want to hear people who actually know what they're talking about talk. I want to start by introducing James Cole, who's the Deputy Attorney General. He was just telling me that his job is to go from place to place, from office to office and meeting to meeting. And every time he goes to a meeting, he has to choose among a series of options, each of which are unacceptable. And yet he's cheerful about it, which I think was a good thing. But that actually is, in some ways, a perfect description of the kinds of issues that we're facing here today, because both curtailing civil liberties and leaving the country vulnerable are unacceptable options. And so the question is, how do both reinforce each other? And I think it is difficult sometimes for people to conceptualize those not as a dichotomy, but as something that can be mutually reinforcing. Perhaps there will be conversation about that. But in any event, if you're going to face very difficult and equally unacceptable challenges, I think the most useful thing to start with is a person smart enough to realize that both of the options or all of the options are unacceptable, and then to figure out how do you untie the knot in the best way possible. So I think we're in good hands that James really has recognized the challenges he faces on a day-to-day basis and thoughtfully addresses them. So I'm very pleased to introduce him today.
Thank you, Paul. I really appreciate that introduction and that incredibly insightful reminder of what my day is like. I also want to thank the George Washington Law School community for hosting this event today. Since its founding, GW Law School has really stood in the best traditions of intellectual inquiry. You're exploring some of the most pressing issues of our time, and this conference is no exception. I'd also like to thank Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights Tom Perez and all of my dedicated colleagues at the Department of Justice who really work every day protecting the rights of all Americans and making sure that we combat racial, ethnic, and religious discrimination. And finally, I want to thank all of you for the opportunity to talk to you today about the very important issue of religious and ethnic discrimination in the wake of 9/11. You know, the search for freedom from religious persecution brought many of the earliest settlers to the United States, the French Huguenots, and then later the Pilgrims and the Puritans. And as a result of this tradition, of this source of much of our country, the framers of our Constitution enshrined the principle of religious freedom in the First Amendment. In addition, the principle of human equality, which was described in the Declaration of Independence as self-evident, was equally, if not more significant, in the founding of our nation. And recognizing the importance of both the equality and religious liberty components of the founding of this nation. In 1785, James Madison described America with pride as, and I quote, an asylum to the persecuted and oppressed of every nation and religion. Since Madison's time, the promise of equality and of religious freedom has brought people of all faiths and backgrounds to America. But we have not always succeeded in delivering on that promise. Racial, religious, ethnic discrimination, unfortunately, has a long history in this country. And yet the story of America has been the story of our continuing effort to ensure that each of us in this country, regardless of our race, our color, or our national origin, has the chance to enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. America's diversity is truly one of its greatest strengths. That diversity and the emphasis that the founders had placed on religious liberty from the very beginning created the space for public discourse about matters of faith and conscience that has made us a stronger, better, and more moral nation. The freedom to communicate with each other about right and wrong, and about our most firmly held beliefs, regardless of the faith that we practice, and even if we practice no faith or religion at all, is one of our most precious and one of our most constructive national treasures. The American tradition of public debate and the discourse that goes with it has made it possible for people from all parts of the world and many faiths to become one nation. Whether it's the Quran's reminder never to let hatred of anyone lead you into the sin of deviating from justice, or Deuteronomy's command of justice, justice shall you pursue, we have much to learn from one another. And one of the most important lessons that we have to learn is that we have far more in common than we have differences. Sadly, at times, in our history, we have not lived up to those ideals. That same public discourse has at times been marred by intolerance and discrimination. But our protection of both religious freedom and the discourse about religion that goes with it not only helps to bring us through those times, but it also helps to strengthen the shared values that we have in this country and develop a national consensus that ultimately rejects that prejudice and that discrimination. As we look back 10 years, we realize that the tragedy of September 11th changed America in ways that we could never have imagined at the time. Every American, and frankly most people in the world, were profoundly touched by the events of that day. And each of us have been shaken by the terrible loss of life, the unspeakable cruelty, and the senselessness of the destruction. 9/11 caused us to redouble our efforts to preserve national security. But it also made changes that now, 10 years later, have become routine. In the face of those changes, we have proven over and over again the enduring resilience and optimism of this nation and of the American people. Unfortunately, one of the many tragic legacies of 9/11 has been an increase in prejudice, discrimination, and hatred directed against persons of Muslim and Sikh faiths, and those who are or who are mistakenly believed to be of Arab or South Asian descent. Some people have wrongly sought to blame the horror of 9/11 on Arab Americans, on Muslim Americans, on Sikh Americans, and on South Asian American communities. It has led to attacks against places of worship. It has led to hate crimes. It has led to job discrimination, and it has even led to the tragic harassment of children in our schools. This kind of stereotyping and hate runs counter to the basic values of equality and religious liberty on which this nation is founded. We must never allow our sorrow, our anger at the senseless attacks of 9/11 to blind us to the great gift of our diversity in this nation. All of us must reject any suggestion that every Muslim is a terrorist or that every terrorist is a Muslim, as we all have seen time and time again, from Oklahoma City to the recent attacks in Oslo, Norway, that no religion and no ethnicity has a monopoly on terror. The Department of Justice takes seriously its role in protecting the country from terrorist threats. And the Department of Justice takes seriously its role in enforcing the laws that protect people against discrimination. Soon after 9/11, President Bush made clear to the nation that those terrorist attacks were committed by individuals who distort the peaceful religion of Islam. And he also made clear that Arab Americans and Muslim Americans suffered with all Americans when our nation was attacked. In the aftermath of 9/11, the Civil Rights Division, led by then Assistant Attorney General Ralph Boyd, who you'll be hearing from today, established an initiative to combat the discrimination that occurred in a misguided retaliation for those attacks. That initiative, I'm proud to say, continues today. The department has also taken strong action against hate crimes in the post-9/11 era. Those crimes and the resulting prosecutions have taken place in nearly every part of the country. To name just a few examples, the department successfully prosecuted an Arlington, Texas man for setting fire to playground equipment at a mosque in July of 2010. We brought to justice 3 men who spray-painted swastikas and white power on a mosque in Columbia, Tennessee, and then burned the mosque beyond recognition. In March of 2010, a husband and wife were convicted of harassing with ethnic slurs and physically assaulting an Indian American couple on a public beach in South Lake Tahoe. The male victim was beaten so severely that he suffered multiple broken bones in his face. And earlier this year, a former employee of the Transportation Security Administration pled guilty to federal hate crimes for assaulting an elderly Somali man because of his race, his national origin, and his religion. The department also has committed itself to protecting the rights of America of all faiths to build their places of worship and to worship in peace. Last October, for example, the department filed an amicus brief in support of a mosque in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. It had been met with strong opposition and a lawsuit. In doing so, the department sought to unequivocally convey its position that a mosque or a gurdwara is a place of worship to be treated the same as a church, a synagogue, a temple, a meeting house, or any other place of worship that we have in this country. And we wanted to make the point that they are all entitled to full protection under federal law. The department is also working to ensure that Americans are not forced to decide between their faith and their job. We brought suit in New York, the Mass Transit Authority, over its refusal to permit Muslim and Sikh bus drivers and subway drivers to wear religious head coverings on the job. We also settled a case involving a Muslim corrections worker in Essex County, New Jersey, who had been fired for refusing to remove her headscarf. We have investigated many cases of harassment of Muslim students. In one example, the department reached a settlement in Cape Henlopen, Delaware, where a teacher had singled out an elementary school student because she was Muslim, and that led to severe harassment of her by other students. Ensuring the rule of law and protecting civil rights in the post-9/11 era is a focus not only for the Civil Rights Division, but for the entire Department of Justice. Attorney General Holder has led the department in efforts to meet and engage with Muslim and Arab communities throughout the country. He has met with religious leaders from a variety of faiths, including some who are probably here in this room today. And the purpose is to discuss how the Department of Justice and the faith communities can work together to reduce incidents of violence, intimidation, and discrimination. Throughout the country, the United States Attorney's offices are actively working to increase their outreach and dialogue with these communities. These engagements help members of these communities understand both the department's role and what their own rights are under federal law. As a conflict resolution and an emergency response agency, the department's Community Relations Service began engaging early at the community level right after 9/11. In this administration, the Community Relations Service has increased its services in response to requests from government and community leaders and has provided assistance to address tension, prevent hate crimes against Arab, Muslim, and Sikh communities, and put a stop to the bullying of our children. And the FBI is included in all of this, conducting a number of programs, often with other department and other government components, to educate communities on the FBI's role and to respond to questions and to people's concerns. All of these efforts, all of them, are helping to build a mutual trust and respect between the department and these communities, and this respect is essential not only to good law enforcement, but also to demonstrating that every law-abiding group and religion is a respected and welcomed part of the American community. In every respect of the department's work, we strive to ensure sensitivity and respect for all peoples and all faiths. As just one example to that end, I recently directed that all components of the Department of Justice reevaluate their training efforts. And in order to make sure that they look from community outreach to national security at whatever training they're doing, to make sure they reflect the sensitivity that we need to bring to these efforts. We also make sure that our law enforcement components, in their interactions with the community, whether it's through responding to an attack on a mosque or executing an arrest warrant, are sensitive to the concerns and rights and rule of law that everyone who has chosen to make this country their home is entitled to. The Justice Department is doing everything possible to protect the national security and to keep America safe from those who would do us harm. We will never waver in that commitment. But we also fully and completely are committed to protecting the civil rights and the civil liberties of all of our people. Those two critical goals are not inconsistent. While to some it might seem easier to focus only on national security with little regard for civil rights or the Constitution, or conversely to protect civil rights and civil liberties at the cost of national security, we at the department disagree. We can, we must, and we will do both. Today, you will be discussing what has happened over the past 10 years and what can be done to ensure that in the future, the topic of this conference will seem out of date or even obsolete. I hope, as all of you do, that on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, there'll be no reason to speak of discriminatory backlash, because there will be none to speak of. When that happens, and I say when that happens, it will be because of the thoughtful work, the energy, and the focus of so many of you here today. In the meantime, I am honored to work with you. I am honored to work with my colleagues at the Department of Justice in that effort we share to fully realize America's highest ideals of religious tolerance, equality, and justice for all. Thank you very much.